Hey, this is Dr. Amie Harwick, and today I'm joined by Moushumi Ghose, a licensed sex therapist, and today we're going to talk about non-binary identities and pronouns. So let's start off. Hey, this is Dr. Amie Harwick. I go by she, her, and hers.
Hi, my name is Mo, and I go by she, her, and hers as well.
So today we're going to talk about what is non-binary, what are these pronouns, and how to be more aware, how to correct yourself if you mess up or you slip up, and what it all means. So queer studies became more prevalent in the 1980s. So it's relatively in the scheme of what's been studied or what's been more prevalent. It's relatively new for the typical person walking down the street.
For the normative.
Yeah. Before, people would identify as LGBT and then LGBTQ. So that means lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer. Those are the letters there. Right. However, that can be non-inclusive.
Yeah, it's a little bit limiting because some people don't identify as lesbian, some people don't identify as bi, and then the whole trans community, they're just sort of lumped into the one letter T. And then now you've got the Q, and I think that with everything that's happening, people are accepting that they don't fit into these finite categories. Mm-hmm. You know, we don't fit. People aren't fitting into male, masculine, gay, lesbian, feminine. You know, so there's a lot more fluidity now in terms of gender.
And that goes to the non-binary. So non-binary meaning not the one or the other, the two. But even LGBTQ, there's 5 components there. So do you have to fit in one of these 5 categories? Well, probably not. There's fluidity within those, and also maybe you don't identify as any of those. So not only is it non-binary that we're looking at here now, but it's not looking at people in boxes, not saying that it's one or the other, or that it's in these categories that are socially constructed. So not just male, female, heterosexual, homosexual, but also, especially in the gay community, who's the top, who's the bottom? Well, maybe it's fluid, or maybe it's neither.
Right. Or maybe you're both, you know, or maybe you're somewhere in between. And I think it's limiting. So what we've seen in the community is LGBTQIA, like all of these letters being added on. And I think that it's important to recognize that we can't all fit into a letter. Mm-hmm.
So let's break down some of the terms that people might use. Mm-hmm. So non-binary is identifying out of the binary identifications of male, female.
So if you don't identify as male or female, because that's binary, you call yourself non-binary.
Mm-hmm. And the next one is gender fluid. Mm-hmm. So that means that you're fluid, that you can change in and out of different identities. And that's kind of most people, most of their lives. They could identify as one thing and then question that, maybe change to something else, maybe uncover something at some point, maybe move into a different part of their life. And that's actually pretty normative. But to identify that way is a different choice, to say, you know what, I'm gender fluid, and that's how I'm identifying.
Mm-hmm. And that, I feel like that term is becoming more and more popular these days as people are rejecting the binary.
Mm-hmm. So bigender, trigender, pangender, what are those?
And no gender.
No gender.
So bigender would be kind of binary. You say, well, I'm both. I'm male and female. Trigender would say, like, I'm male, female, and maybe, you know, pangendered. And then pangender is I can fluctuate, kind of like gender fluid. You know, you mentioned no gender.
No gender, somebody that just, I don't want to identify as a gender because I don't want that identification at all.
Yeah.
So rejecting all of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Rejecting the fact that there is even a continuum of it. Yeah.
Because gender is something that's socially constructed. So that's different than a biological sex.
Yeah.
Gender is a socially constructed idea.
Yeah. And the other one, which you mentioned also, was the third gender, which I think was when this whole movement sort of started, and you'd go to fill a form out and it was like male, female, and that's very binary. So then they originally considered having a third gender on there, which still kind of is limiting. So I think we've gotten rid of third gender.
So let's talk about pronouns, because that's what we're talking about here, is how to identify, how to address people, how do you ask? Well, honestly, just ask. How do you prefer to be addressed? How do you identify? So when you ask those things, people could answer with he, his, him. Okay.
She, her, hers.
they, their, them. Sometimes a combination of those. Somebody could be, hi, I'm she, her, hers, and also they, their, them. So both are okay, and you can be fluid between those. So listen when people give you that information, because maybe there is more room or fluctuation.
And there's also they, zim, zer.
What is that?
Yeah, ze, zim, zer, zer. They're kind of like, it's almost like the third gender we were talking about. It was sort of getting away from the him, her, she, he, ze, they. But now everyone's using they, she, her, he, zim, they. So it's important to ask, like you were saying, like just ask if you're not sure that they don't identify as she or he, because a lot of people don't these days, and I think it's really important to just recognize that. And so someone might actually correct you and not get offended when they do.
So it's interesting that the dictionary actually added genderqueer to the dictionary, Merriam-Webster's dictionary, just I think last year, the year before, so pretty recently. Another thing I hear people say is, oh, they, there, that's so new. Why are people starting to do this? But actually what I read online, of course, that's the source of all accurate information, is that a lot of historical writers from more of the 1800s, like the Victorian era, were actually writing in they and their as a formal use of singular ways to address people, like Jane Austen and T.S. Eliot. So it's actually not a new thing at all. It is a more formal way to address somebody.
Yeah. You do hear it, well, they're not coming or they're not here. And I think that a lot of times, too, they was used in the gay community when they weren't out. So instead of a woman referring to her lesbian partner as a she, because she didn't want anyone to know, she might refer to her as a they.
It's a way to not give that information.
It's a little bit more
before.
ambiguous, and I think it works now because ambiguity is good. We don't want to identify with something that's so rigid like he or she.
And speaking of ambiguity, I remember back in the 90s, I remember subscribing to Ms. Magazine, and I would identify as Ms. And at the time, I thought that was so progressive that, you know, it's nobody's business if I'm in any type of relationship, if I'm married, if I'm straight, and for a man, they can have this way to be addressed without giving away their relationship status.
Right.
And so I thought using Ms. all these years ago was the progressive,
very progressive, very feminist.
Except now that is so old school, because now we have so many different ways to address people, not just with pronouns and identifications and ways to address people, but also with titles like that. So Mr. is, you know, there's still a Mr. and a Mrs. and a Miss and Ms. However, we even now have MX. Which, do you know how to say that?
Yeah, you're just saying MX.
Oh, okay. MX.
It's kind of like they do this also when you're talking about, for example, we used to say the Latino community, and now it's Latinx, because Latino and Latina, again, are gender binary. So you might hear that as well, the Latinx community.
Okay, so that's getting away from the binary and just making it non-binary by adding an X after it. So MX. And MX was actually also added to the dictionary as well as genderqueer.
Yay!
So, in terms of relationships, the way you identify as far as your pronoun or non-binary, she, he, they, it has nothing to do with your sexual or romantic orientation. And sexual and romantic could be separate too. You could be in romantic relationships with one type of person and have sex with other types of people. That could overlap or not. But it's really separate from how you identify with your pronoun.
Or if a person looks feminine, traditionally feminine, that they're going to automatically go for something that's more traditionally masculine. Again, we have been really deeply conditioned to assume these binary norms. So masculine must seek feminine. And that's just not the case. A lot of very masculine seeming things can be drawn to other things that seem very masculine too. And there is no gender that owns masculine or feminine.
Language shapes us. So the way we construct language really has an impact on how we see the world around us. If there's not an actual word in English for something, it's almost like it doesn't exist. So in different languages, there's different words for sex, love, identity, relationships, and we're really confined to what our language gives us. So when we use more inclusive language, we are then helping to reduce social stigma, because we're giving more availability for ways that people can define themselves more authentically. So not only is it respectful to people who are identifying in a certain fashion to ask them how they identify or use that language? But it's also helping to change the social stigma by making it more normative, that you hear these things and see these things in our culture.
Right. And this kind of brings up a couple of things for me that have been popping up in my life lately, is, for example, when you find out the gender of your child before they're even born, you're going to go to the doctor and you're going to get your ultrasound, and it's going to say, oh, your child is either male or female. So very early from the womb, we're being sort of socialized to a gender. And so to be a little bit sensitive about that, because your child may identify as he after he comes out as a male, but he may not. And so giving your child some fluidity and room to be fluid, it can be really empowering for them. The other thing that comes to mind is little things like, you know, you go to a wedding and you assume there's going to be a bride and a groom. You know, again, everything is very, you know, we see this a lot now. There's two brides, there's two grooms, and maybe not assuming that there's even going to be one or the other. You know, like just recognizing that we need to be a little bit more inclusive and not to assume.
Yeah, give more room and more space for babies and children to explore their own identity, maybe not saturating your baby boy in blue or baby girl in pink, forcing the baby girl to have dolls and the boy to have boy toys, because when that
Boy
child,
toys.
yeah, boy toys,
I like that.
well, when they start growing, especially a child who starts feeling like their actual internal identity is not what their parents are projecting onto them, that male child that's then dressed in blue and has trucks and army guys, but really wants to play dress up or identify with something that's socially looked at as being more feminine, might feel a lot of shame because it's conflicting with this world around him. So if we just create a situation that's maybe just a little more neutral, not as heavily weighted to each side, and allow our children to explore themselves, and when they do present with things that are maybe foreign to the parents, creating a space that is safe for them to talk about it. So what can you do? You got all this information now, you're a little bit more insightful, you have the facts a little bit more. Obviously, go look it up, read, talk to people you know about it, start a conversation, but
it may have already happened to you.
So here are some things. Here are 5 things that you can do right now, starting today, that will make you more aware, more socially conscious, and more respectful to people. So the first one is correct people with respect. So if somebody addresses you incorrectly, or you see people online, especially online, social media, doing something that you feel isn't socially okay with how they're addressing somebody else, or maybe could be disrespectful, just say, hey, have you thought about asking their identity? You know, just wondering, just curious, because when you attack people for ways they behave, and a lot of times people just simply don't know or they don't understand, they're not going to take that information and then make the change. They're going to reject it and maybe get angry. So approaching people with respect when you ask them to make a change or be more aware.
Yeah, that's great. And that's true for even if it's for yourself or somebody else, right? Because you can normalize it by actually identifying your pronoun and or your gender identity either in person or whether it's on your social media or your online profiles, just to be, even if you identify as a she or a he, just to be more inclusive, because it is becoming more of the norm to identify and sort of declare what your pronoun is.
The next thing is apologize if you slip up, and just be more mindful moving forward. So let's say you address somebody as she because they look feminine, and they say, actually I'm they, and you say, you know, I'm sorry. I'll be more aware of that with that person and in general. So just apologize. It's pretty simple.
It's really easy to get caught up and feel really guilty, and when we feel guilty, we have a tendency to get defensive. We feel like maybe we're being attacked or something, but it's not. I mean, we're in the process of changing some really ingrained societal norms right now, and so just being real, you can, you know, just go easy on yourself. Asking people is really the best way to go. So if it feels ambiguous, or you're not really sure, or just to be polite and respectful, you can just ask anyone and everyone, how do they identify, what their pronouns are.
Hey Mo, how do you identify?
I'm a she, her.
Oh, great.
And how about you, Amy?
She, her.
Great.
Good to know.
Nice to know.
Easy. Lastly is use non-binary greetings. We're pretty conditioned in our culture to be like, hey ladies, hey gentlemen, hey boys.
Yeah.
And so, you know, just be more aware and use language that is more inclusive. All right, folks.
Or hey guys.
Hey people.
Guys is pretty like.
I use guys with women.
Yeah. Well, I say dude. I call everybody dude.
So, you know, as you can see, there's things to be more aware of, but also ways that we attach non-binary meanings to words that we use individually. Maybe somebody
Alright,
else
yeah.
might not want dude because that seems more male. For me, dude and
Right.
and guys is how I address a lot of my friends
Every-
that identify as female. So, but just be more mindful of it and just trying to include that in your language a little bit more, and be aware when you hear it too. Like, oh, that was a non-binary way to address a group
I
of
like
people.
folks. I like folks a lot. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I have to come up with a few more.
And on that note, that's all, folks.
folks.
This is Dr. Amie Harwick, she, her.
And I'm Moushumi Ghose, she, her.
And you can check out this video as well as other videos that I have on my channel. You can comment or leave questions below. And feel free to check out both of our websites and social medias, which will be listed in this video.
Thanks.